It's very telling why this year 2025 keeps coming up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's incredibly prophetic, and I think we're about to see 2025 is the exact middle of the 9th week. By the time the 10th week starts, the world is already about 300 years into the millennium. Is that veil thinning? Is that restrainer loosening? And does that allow evil agents to bestow upon us technology that we might not have been able to create on our own? By that year, everything will be done, everything will be set in place for the millennial reign of Christ.
Josh, I cannot believe how many things are in the Dead Sea Scrolls regarding 2025 and beyond. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I just did an interview with someone else talking about events that are going to happen in 2025, but you've discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, these are ancient scrolls that are talking about the time that we're living in now and the end times. We will get to 2025 in a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor. There's bad turbulence ahead. The economy is a minefield right now, ready to detonate and destroy the wealth and dreams of the unprepared. Bank failures, de-dollarization, debt. But amidst the chaos, a beacon of hope emerges. Kevin Sorbo, screen legend Hercules, Christian actor, and outspoken activist for the people, with his economic crisis toolkit, crafted in partnership with the experts at Noble Gold, Sorbo is now on a mission to help everyday Americans navigate the coming nightmare. This shock-proof toolkit is your compass through the turmoil, with recession-proof strategies, inflation-busting techniques, and opportunity-seizing skills to help you not just survive, but thrive in the bedlam. The crisis threatens to derail your financial future, but you now can stay on track and emerge stronger than ever. And the best part? This shield of knowledge is yours, absolutely free. Don't become another casualty. Enlist in Sorbo's Wealth Warrior ranks today and arm yourself with the tools and tactics you need to protect your hard-earned assets. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com now and sign up for the Economic Crisis Toolkit. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. There's always a risk of investment and there's no guarantee of any kind. But some people just, Josh, some people just say, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we shouldn't even, listen to anything that's in that. We only want to listen to scripture. But meanwhile, Jesus quoted the Dead Sea Scrolls. Can you explain?
Yeah, so what's really fascinating about the Dead Sea Scrolls is we actually do see an instance where Jesus is quoting the Dead Sea Scrolls about himself. So in Matthew 11:2-6, Jesus is talking about what prophecies that the Messiah is going to fulfill. Things like the blind will receive their sight and the lame will walk, the lepers are cleansed, things like that. But then he also says that the dead will be raised up. Well, when we look back in the Old Testament, we can find all of those prophecies except for that one. Nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that the Messiah is going to raise the dead. So what's actually happening is Jesus is quoting a Dead Sea Scroll called the Messianic Apocalypse, where it does say that the dead will be raised up from the Messiah. And we know that he's quoting that because all of the apostles seem to have known exactly what he was talking about. Nobody asked, Jesus, where are you getting that from? The Old Testament doesn't say anything about that. They would have been very familiar with this Messianic Apocalypse scroll and the prophecies that were contained within it. So the scrolls are absolutely fascinating. There's a lot of accurate prophecy in there. And I have not found anything in the scrolls that contradict the Bible. And it seems like the New Testament supports at least looking into the Dead Sea Scrolls because they're quoted quite a bit throughout the New Testament.
Now, I've done an interview a long time ago with someone else regarding the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the stuff that you uncovered, they didn't even touch it. It's like you've done this expedition and uncovered amazing things about the end times. I can't believe it. But can you just explain the history of the scrolls?
Yeah, absolutely. So the scrolls come from a time that's often referred to as the 400 silent years in between the Old and New Testaments, and they were discovered. They were discovered in Qumran in 1947. A Bedouin shepherd was throwing rocks into nearby caves, and he heard something that sounded like breaking pottery. And when he looked into it, he discovered that there were clay vessels that were filled with ancient scrolls, and that's what was discovered in the caves. So between 900 and 1,000 parchments were discovered, and they contained sacred writings in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And generally speaking, with very few exceptions, the scrolls were discovered to have been written about 100 or 200 years before the birth of Christ. So this would have been in the intertestamental period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, during that 400 years. And this verified dating of the origin of the Dead Sea Scrolls is really important because they contain an amazing amount of detailed prophecy, and we know that they're not faked. And the prophecies have to do with the first and the second coming of the Messiah. It's also important too because there's a lot of rumors going around, especially in college campuses, that the Bible that we have now is changed. Like the Old Testament that we have has been changed throughout the years, and we can't really trust it. Well, since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can prove no, like our Old Testament is exactly how it's supposed to be. It was not changed in the Middle Ages at all. And what we have, because the Dead Sea Scrolls contain all the books of the Old Testament except Esther, and then a lot of other scrolls as well. So we can go and compare all of those scrolls to our Old Testament and actually see that it lines up. It's completely accurate. And so because of that, and because of the prophecies that are contained within it, the Dead Sea Scrolls are incredibly important, and very thankful that we have access to them in our time today.
So, who wrote the different scrolls? And also, I'd like you to explain about the Essenes as opposed to the Pharisees. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were written by the Zadokian priesthood, and at the time, and it's funny because when you read the Old Testament, everything in Israel seems to make sense. But then when you start the New Testament, everything's different. They're occupied by Rome. There's Pharisees, Sadducees, and there are Essenes. Now we don't hear the word Essene in the Gospels. That term was coined later by Josephus. But you have these different factions. So basically, what happened during that intertestamental period is Israel, and I go through the whole history in the book, but Israel basically got themselves involved in a bunch of conquests, and they ended up getting occupied by various groups. One of them was Antiochus for Epiphanes, and we know that from the desecration of the temple and all that. Well, apparently part of that time was Antiochus told the Jewish people, like, okay, well, you can do some of your Jewish things, but you have to adopt certain things that we want. One of the most important was the calendar, and so the Pharisees and the Sadducees basically stayed behind. Now at this time they weren't all called Pharisees and Sadducees. Those names came later after this split up. But there was a group within the Jewish people that said, no, we're not going to do that. And they first, if I remember right, they first escaped to Egypt and settled there for a little while, and then came back to Qumran. And those were the Zadokian priests. So basically, by the time that you get to the time of Jesus, you have three main interpretation of scripture, three main lines of thought, three main groups that would teach different things. So the Pharisees were really the ones that were in power, and they had their interpretation, which is based on what they called oral Torah. And then you had the Sadducees, who essentially didn't really believe in anything. The Sadducees, like they got so far off that they didn't believe in angels or the afterlife or anything like that, and they felt the best thing to do is just to go along with whatever the government says, so you can have the easiest life possible, because there's nothing after this anyway. So that was the Sadducees. And then you had the Essenes. The Essenes were the ones they were found all throughout Israel, but they were the ones that followed the interpretations of the Zadok priests in Qumran. And their interpretation was basically what ours is today of the Old Testament. except that they were still waiting for the Messiah. But they believed in the literal interpretation of the Old Testament. They believed in the prophecies. One other major difference is the Pharisees believed that prophecy did not exist anymore, that God wasn't giving any new revelations or anything, whereas the Essenes believed that God was. And we see that all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a ton of prophecy in there. Most of it is about Christ, the Messiah's first coming, and then some of it's about the second coming. But it mainly, for them, the next big thing was going to be the arrival of the Messiah, his first coming. And the Essenes did believe in one Messiah with two appearances, that there was going to be a first coming, that he actually would die to absolve our sins, and they even had that written down. There's a scroll called 11, if I remember right, it's 11Q13. And that scroll is really important because they actually write out exactly when the Messiah was supposed to come. And again, this was written a couple hundred years before Jesus. So the Essenes knew exactly when the Messiah would come, what to look for, what he would be doing. But there were these other prevailing thoughts at the time. That's why when you read through the Gospels, why there are times that Jesus can go into a crowd and like thousands of people immediately get saved before he even really says anything. They just get saved. It's really easy. But then there are other times that he can talk to certain people till he's blue in the face and they're just not budging. That they're willing to say that this can't be the Messiah. He's full of demons. They'd rather blaspheme him rather than accept it. Well, that's the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Pharisees believed that the Messiah would be basically a military leader that would lead them in war against the Romans. And so that was the Pharisee interpretation. And then that later, like a different Messiah would come. So you had these two different interpretations. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are what are the records that were left from the Zadokian priest in Qumran. And so not every Essene in Israel lived in Qumran. They lived all throughout Israel, but they followed the priests that were in Qumran, and they followed their teachings and in their interpretation. So yeah, there's a really rich history there that I get into it really in depth in the book, but it's fascinating to see that, and then to see what's even more mind-blowing is that the Essenes ended up leaving Qumran after Jesus died and was resurrected and ascended. Sometime after that, because they knew that the destruction of the temple was coming. They knew that this huge persecution was going to happen. So they left their scrolls behind. Well, they took some with them, but they left copies of their scrolls behind in Qumran, and then they left. And there's a big question in academia. They're wondering, like, where did they go? Why'd they leave? Like, it's like a big mystery. Well, it's really no mystery at all, because Jesus told them, go out, make disciples. I mean, they heard the Great Commission, they took it seriously, and so that's exactly what they did. They obeyed their Messiah. And we as Christians today are the recipients of that. So we actually do come from the Essenes. It doesn't mean that we are Essenes, but we come from that line of teaching, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. And without the Dead Sea Scrolls, we would have no idea.
And it just makes you wonder, like when you were describing that Jesus would go to some places and they would not even listen to him, and other places they would all just get saved. If those people really were then the Essenes, because they knew what to look for with Messiah coming, and as opposed to the Pharisees saying he has to be more of a military figure. So super fascinating. But you were talking about the accuracy in your, it's a 2-volume set and books, and it's really amazing. And it's the accuracy of the Essenes prophetically. Now tell me about the the accuracy regarding Herod.
Yeah, so there was an Essene named Menachem, and this was recorded by Josephus. And the Essenes were known for having completely accurate prophecy, and we get that from outside sources as well, like Josephus says that. And I should mention too, in the book, I do have all of what Josephus wrote about the Essenes in an appendix in the second volume. And if people want to get the book, the best place is prophecywatchers.com. And if people get the book, make sure you get both of them, because it's a 2-volume set, and one book won't make sense without the other. So you want to get both. But anyway, so there was an Essene named Menachem, who, when Herod was basically in school, when he was very young before he was king, uh, Menachem gave Herod this prophecy that he would be king, and basically it would start off all right, but he would end up getting really corrupt and end up being a really terrible king over time. Well, Herod at the time wasn't even looking for anything like that. Like he wasn't, he didn't know that he was going to be king. He wasn't set up to be the king of Israel or anything like that. But over time, that as we know, that ended up happening. So Herod called Menachem back to back to have another conversation with him and ask him, okay, well, you were right about this prophecy, so how long do I have? And I forget the exact number that Menachem said. I think it was like 35 years or something. But when you do the math, he was right. And then reiterated again that he was going to end up becoming corrupt, which that absolutely did happen. And Herod had a terrible end to his reign. So that's one small example of how accurate the prophecies of the Essenes were, and we actually see that same Essene later in the book of Acts, and I believe it's Manaheim or something like that. Manahem, I think it's translated as that in Acts. But when you actually go back to the original language and look at who this guy is, it's that same Menachem guy. The Essenes lived a long time. They lived almost twice as long as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as their contemporaries, because the word Essene actually just means healer. So, apart from their interpretations of the Bible and the prophecies, they also knew how to. They had a lot of knowledge about natural cures and natural healing and stuff like that. And Josephus records that as well. So because of that, because of their diet, probably also because of the area that they lived in, they lived to be over 100 years old most times, like around 120. So they had extremely long lifespans as compared to the Pharisees and Sadducees. So that's where that word Essene comes from. It just means healer. But so that's just one prophetic example of many. But it's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating. Now, I want to go to the solar calendar. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. When I first was reading about it in your series, in your book, on your books, I was like, "What? Solar calendar?" And I mean, because I've just been taught that it's the lunar calendar and Rosh Kodesh, that Kodesh meant, the new moon, but it's not that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have been so off on the true calendar. So explain the solar calendar.
Yeah, definitely. So the Essenes had, so there were basically two calendars that were being used during the time of Christ. There was the calendar that the Essenes were using, and then there was the calendar that the Pharisees were using. And when Antiochus, when that whole thing happened, that was part of the deal that I mentioned earlier. Antiochus wanted the Jewish people, the Jewish leadership, to accept his Seleucid calendar, and it's interesting because when you look at the lunar calendar of the Pharisees that they had, and you compare it to the ancient Seleucid calendar that Antiochus would have had, they're identical. And so the Jewish people that would become the Essenes, that would become known the Essenes, at the time they said no to that, and they wanted to keep their calendar because. And what's really interesting is in the book of Jubilees, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a prophecy about this, where God even said, there's going to be a time where, I gave you this solar calendar, and there's going to be a time you're going to abandon that for a lunar calendar. And God was saying he was against that. And that ended up happening. Well, at least the Pharisees and Sadducees, they made that deal, but the Essenes didn't. So the whole idea of the calendar, the Essenes believed that God gave Adam a solar calendar. And not only is it a yearly calendar, but it's also a calendar that describes all 6,000 years of human history and the 1,000-year Sabbath. So according to the Essenes, there would be 7,000 years of this current creation before a new heavens and new earth. And, we know that from the book of Revelation and stuff, but they were talking about that well before Revelation was ever written, before John was even born. And So the way that their calendar worked, it was based on the sun, and the reason that they said it was so important for them to keep their original calendar is because they knew that if they did the feast days wrong, if they did the festivals wrong, especially if they did it on the wrong day, uh, a priest could get killed for that. We see examples of that in the Old Testament where priests don't handle the festivals exactly correctly, and they end up dropping dead because of it. And it was really important. And the way that the Essenes taught is that the reason that's the case, the reason it's so important is because the earthly temple is a shadow of the heavenly temple. So while certain rituals are being performed in the earthly temple, at the same time, angels are performing certain rituals in the heavenly temple. And we actually see examples of this in the Bible, such as Revelation 8, when the angel has the censer of incense and stuff. Well, when you look at the details of that, that's the Day of Atonement ceremony. Now that's the heavenly one. They're not, in the heavenly temple, angels aren't sacrificing animals or anything like that. We're not given a whole lot of detail about what the angels are doing, but we have a little bit of detail. But on Earth, people are sacrificing and praying and doing all this stuff while the angels are performing their heavenly duties as well. And those are supposed to happen at the same time, which is interesting too, because that means, according to the Essenes, time runs the same in heaven as it does Earth, which actually makes a lot of sense. But so they wanted to keep the rituals and the festival days exactly on the days that they were supposed to. So they kept the solar calendar and eventually moved to Qumran, and they kept doing their stuff there. So there's a lot of prophecy that can be found in that calendar, not just the year calendar, but just the idea of how they split up this long 7,000 year period. And it's interesting too, because we can go back to the ancient church fathers, and they taught as well, because they got this from the Essenes. The Essenes took the Great Commission and went and made disciples, and some of those disciples are what we would call the early church fathers. And a lot of them talk about how there's going to be 6,000 years of human history and then 1,000-year Sabbath, just like there's 6 days of a week, and there's a Sabbath after that on the seventh day. And then after that, everything would be recreated. There'd be a new heavens and new earth. So the church fathers got that from the Essenes. Well, they also split up this time period into certain segments. So the way that we have, years and centuries and millennia, they had Shemitahs, which was a 7-year period. Then they had Jubilees, which was a 50-year period. They had Onas, which is a 500-year period, and then they had Ages, which was a 2,000-year period. And in their view, there would be it's four. They would call it 4 ages, but it's basically like 3.5. So there would be from the time of creation till the call of Abraham. That's the first age. That's the first 2,000 years, and that's called either the age of creation or the age of chaos. Then the second one, the age of Torah, started at the call of Abraham and went until 75 AD. So just a few years right after the temple was destroyed. And then according to the Essenes, the last age would be from 75, or the church age. The last age would be the millennial age, but the church age, they actually called it the Age of Grace, which is amazing that they even called it that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, again, 200 years before Christ was born. But they said that would last from 75 AD to 2075 AD. Now, what's really interesting about that doesn't necessarily mean, if the Essenes are right, that we have to wait until 2075 for Christ to return. That's not exactly what that means. So while these time periods, you can basically set these time periods in stone, you can't really set the events that occur in stone. So, for example, the final Jubilee, the final 50 years of the Age of Torah was between 25 AD and 75 AD. Well, think about Jesus' ministry. That was really early on. That would have been from 29, somewhere around 29 AD to 32 AD. That it would have been somewhere around there. Would have been the ministry of Christ. Well, that is really early on in that final jubilee of the Torah age. The Torah age didn't end until 75 AD, and it's not that a certain event happened in 75 AD that caused anything. It was just that was the time where the next age was to begin. So a lot of prophecies had to be fulfilled in that time. Well, and you see this at the end of each age too. You see like the final jubilee. There's a lot of chaotic stuff and a lot of miracles. So the end of the age of creation was the whole Tower of Babel incident. The end of the age of Torah was the first coming of Christ and everything. And a lot of those prophecies were wrapped up well before the age of grace technically started. So we could see that again in our time. We could see we're going to be hitting 2025, and technically because the calendars are a little, the Essene calendar is different from our Gregorian calendar. Technically, the beginning of the final jubilee of our age would be early to mid-March of 2026, technically. But suffice to say, I make a note of that in the book, and then I say, it's just really a lot easier to say like 2025 because that's like where everything's wrapping up, because 2025 to 2075. But we could see a similar thing that we saw in the age of Torah. We could have all of these prophecies, including the tribulation and everything. We could have that happen early in our final jubilee. I mean, that could happen next year. That could happen in a few years from now. We don't have to wait all the way till 2075. Now, Jesus could do that. He could decide that he's going to wait till 2075. But all it means is that by the year 2075, 2076, everything should be in place for us to start the millennial age, to start for Christ to start his millennial age. And think about all of the things that need to be fulfilled. It's not just we have a 7-year tribulation, Jesus returns, and then that's it. There's still a lot of things. When you read the end of the book of Ezekiel, there's a brand new temple and a brand new city. How long is it going to take for that to be built? Well, the temple of Herod took about 40 years. And I don't think that Jesus is just going to come down and, again, just snap his fingers and a temple and city are going to appear. I think that's going to need to be built. And so if that takes 40 years, well, you subtract that from, or 40 or 50 years, you subtract that from 2075 and you end up really early in our final jubilee where Jesus would return. So a lot of times when I talk about this, especially on my channel and other interviews and things, when I give that 2075 date, a lot of people get deflated because they're like, oh no, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive to 2075. And I say, look, it's okay. Like Jesus could come back. Like a lot of things can happen earlier on, and you can have all the judgments of Jesus that gets performed when he returns. You can have all that stuff, and then you could still have decades where things need to get set up. How long does it take to notify the whole world of how things are now? Jesus is reigning, and emissaries from nations are expected to come to tabernacles, and and people have to beat their swords into plowshares. Like, how long does it take to get the whole world up on these new rules? It's not going to be overnight. And then again, especially with the new temple and the new city, and I take that totally literally in Ezekiel. That stuff takes time. So I believe it's very likely that we will have like the tribulation and all this stuff. And I'm not going to set a date to it, but I would expect that it would probably happen pretty early on in our final jubilee, which would be from 2025 to 2075. I don't know exactly what year or anything, but probably pretty early on. Then when Jesus returns, take some time to clean. It's going to take some time for people to clean up the earth. It's going to take some time for all of there's like 4 different judgments that happen at that time. It's going to take some time to build all this stuff and basically get the world ready for the millennial reign, so that by 2075, by that year, everything will be done. Everything will be set in place for the millennial reign of Christ. So to me, that's really exciting. We're living in prophetic and very exciting times.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I first, saw the end of the age being at 2075, yes, I was one of those people too that went, oh no, with everything that's going on. Oh my goodness. And then I would be 1,000 years old by then. So anyway, but when I saw the pattern of what you were talking about, like at the end of the second age, the age of Torah, that Jesus, I mean, he died and was resurrected towards the beginning of that Jubilee, which was, so it wasn't at, if it was at 75 that happened, then I'd be like, ah, look at that pattern. But it was the beginning of that. And then I went, phew. It's like, okay, great. Now I've got to ask you, Josh, some people are going to say, oh, well, I really want to get on that calendar. I want to know where I'm at. So
Yeah.
where could they see that so they could know, okay, we're at this day as far as the Gregorian, but where am I on the solar calendar? So.
Yeah. Yeah. So my very good friend, Dr. Ken Johnson, has developed a free website. It's called dsscalendar.org. And you can go to dsscalendar.org and you can look up any date that you'd like. And you'll get the Gregorian date. So you'll get our date, but then underneath it, you'll also or right on top of it, like you'll also see the Dead Sea Scroll calendar and what things happen on that date. So you could if something major happens in Israel, you can go to that website and look at that date and see if it falls on a festival day or something like that. Also, we have a print version of that, which a lot of people prefer the print version because they can just look at their wall and do it. But we have a wall calendar available. And you can find a link to that at either my website, dailyrenegade.com. I have it right on the homepage, or Ken Johnson's website, biblefacts.org. And I think it's in the store. But if you scroll down, if I remember right, it's right there on his page. But we have print like a wall calendar where on the top you get the normal date with our normal date, but then on the bottom you actually get to see the Dead Sea Scroll date and dates, and you can compare the two. And what's really great about that too, like when I was writing the book, I was trying to figure out a lot of stuff from Revelation, because this is the calendar that the Bible uses. When you go from anywhere from Genesis to Revelation, when you see anything that says, on the third day of the month or on this month, you can track that down with this calendar and actually see, oh, that's why they made mention of that date. It's on, the Festival of New Wine or something like that. Well, you can do that with the prophetic day counts as well. And for me, it's a lot easier instead of clicking around on a website. It's a lot easier for me to just have the print version and then just do the counts. And what's great is with the Essene calendar, all their months are exactly 30 days. And then they had what was called a leap week to make up for that. But it makes counting really easy. So if you want to figure out when the 5 months of the locusts in Revelation might be, you can actually count that out, and you can actually figure it out. It's really interesting because we have this calendar now. We know that 5 months, it's between the days of the Day of Atonement, which I believe that's when the abomination of desolation is going to occur for a lot of reasons that I do get into in the book. But it's the 5 months between that date and then Purim, which is 5 months later. And why Purim? Well, Purim is a Jewish celebration where they'll go out on the streets and they'll celebrate, and it's from Esther, and they give gifts and stuff. Well, I remember when I was a kid, I would read Revelation and I would read about the two witnesses, and it says that when the two witnesses were killed, the Jewish people they were out in the streets giving each other gifts, and I thought that was really weird because I get celebrating, according to these unrepentant people, these two witnesses would have been like terrorists to them. So I understand why they would want to celebrate, but giving gifts, like I remember when Osama bin Laden was killed, and yeah, America celebrated that, but we didn't give each other gifts. It's just a weird thing. Well, that always stuck with me. And then when I learned about what Purim was, it was like, oh, it makes sense. That happens on Purim. So you can actually track this down with this calendar and say, like, okay, the abomination happens on the Day of Atonement, and it has to, because the ceremony that's involved, that's happening, and even in the heavenly temple in Revelation 8, that's all Day of Atonement rituals. And so the abomination of desolation happens on the Day of Atonement. Right after that, right when that happens, the locusts are released. There's like an asteroid and locusts are released. I believe those first few trumpets are pretty consecutive, like within probably a 2 or 3 day period. And they're allowed to torture unsaved people for 5 months. Well, then you get everything with the witnesses, and when you do the, because we know that the witnesses, their ministry lasts for I think it's 1,260 days. I have it in the book. So you can actually pinpoint right when their ministry starts, and it's in the beginning of the tribulation. There's a big debate on that in Christianity. Do the two witnesses start their ministry at the beginning of the tribulation or the second half of the tribulation? It has to be the first half, because if it's the first half, everything lines up. If it's a first half with a leap week, all of those day counts line up perfectly. But if it's in the second half, it doesn't match up with the calendar at all. So those are just like a couple of small examples on how you can use this calendar, and not only for prophetic things, but for historic things too. You can map out exactly when the flood of Noah happened. You can map out like Moses' ministry on the mountain and when all that happened. And I do that in the book. So having a print version of this calendar is really helpful, because you can take that right along with your Bible, because it's the same calendar that the Bible uses. And anytime that there's a date given, or so and so days of whatever month, you can look that up and you can see exactly what it is, and you can even map out prophecy that way. So yeah, again, the calendars are available at dailyrenegade.com or biblefacts.org. And if you just want the website, the free version, it's dsscalendar.org.
We're going to get into more of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how another way in the Dead Sea Scrolls points to around 2025, which is crazy. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to my channel, put a like on it, and also share the video. Josh, your information is so very interesting. Now, as far as the calendar, before we go on to another way of measuring time, with the solar calendar, like, okay, if we think that Rosh Hashanah is in September, how far off is it?
Yeah, a lot of those festival and feast days are different on the Essene calendar. But I will say, though, because a lot of people, what I don't want people to think is, oh, what calendar should we be following? Because that's not exactly right. This was something for Israel. Now we can look at these calendars and see if anything prophetic happens on certain days. But there were dates on the Pharisee calendar as well, the lunar calendar, where Jesus did fulfill them on those dates. And the way that I look at it is, Jesus will meet you where you are. And I think that that's what he was doing. So we do see fulfillments definitely on the Essene calendar for sure, by and large, but Jesus even took time to fulfill some of what was expected on the Pharisee calendar as well. So yeah, there are feast days that are totally and wildly different on the Essene calendar, but then again, according to the Essene interpretation, they believe they had the correct days, where when they did these rituals, they did these festivals, these feast days, that those were the exact same days that the angels were performing their duties in the heavenly temple for that day too. So the way that I look at it for us today, it's like, well, the vast majority of us, not all of us, but the vast majority of us are Gentile believers. So we're not beholden to, we're not required to follow any calendar really. But I look at it more as a point of study. It's really interesting. You can find prophetic things in there that might lend some clues as to what's coming, what's ahead, what to look for prophetically. But I think there are times that you can find that on the modern Jewish calendar as well, because, like I said, again, even during Jesus' ministry, he fulfilled things on both calendars, more so on the Essene calendar, but he did fulfill things on both. So I don't have any problem with somebody who wants to look at the modern Jewish calendar and try to figure out if something's happening there. It very, very well could be. So I say check out both calendars. I think they're both interesting. And also look historically at what things have been fulfilled on each of these calendars and just compare the two. And so, yeah, I encourage people to do that.
Okay, now I'd like you to explain with the Book of Enoch another way of measuring time. I found this absolutely fascinating, of the 10 700-year periods. Yeah, can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is really interesting. So in the Book of Enoch, it's chapters, I believe I have it in the book, I think it's like 93 and 96 or something like that. I have it in the book and I lay it all out. But Enoch, he's got a different way of splitting up these time periods. Now, he would have still adhered to the solar calendar. This is more of a prophetic way of dividing up the same amount of time. So it doesn't conflict with the solar calendar. They went by the solar calendar. They didn't necessarily go by this calendar. It's not even really a calendar. It's what Enoch was doing was splitting up the times a little different into 700-year periods, where essentially every day is 100 years in this 7,000 year time period. So he split the 7,000 year time period into 10 different sections of 700 years, and he gave a prophecy for each of those, for all 10. And again, the latest that people can say that this was written, the absolute latest, would have been around 200 BC. It couldn't have been written any later than that. So I think actually Enoch's a lot older than that. What we have are copies, but let's just say that 200 BC date is accurate. That's the latest that Enoch could have been written, including this prophecy. So you can get up to about the 5th or 6th week, and you could say, well, of course, that's all history to somebody who's living in 200 BC. But then after that, you can't really say that anymore. I mean, in the prophecies, I mean, you have the Protestant Reformation described in there. Obviously, you have the Great Commission, people becoming Christians. But what's really interesting about it is where we are in that time. So we would be in the 9th week, and he calls these sections weeks because they're 700-year periods where every day is 100 years. We right now are in the 9th week out of 10, and we are smack dab in the middle of it. 2025 is the exact middle of the 9th week. And what the prophecy says about the 9th week, it says that this is the time where the judgment of the angels is going to happen, where the vanquishment of evil is going to happen, basically the return of the Messiah. That's what this week is known for. So, you know, when we and then the 10th week is all about the millennium and stuff, because by the time the 10th week starts, the world is already about 300 years into the millennium. So it's all about that. But so, you know, we might ask, well, why would we look at the middle point of that week? This whole prophecy it has a certain structure to it that's called chiastic. It has a chiastic structure, meaning it's like a palindrome. So the first week and the 10th week relate to each other in some way. They're structured similarly. And so in the first week, it talks about in the 7th part of that week, this and this is going to happen. And then in the 10th week, it also talks about the 7th part. You don't see that in any of the other ones. Now, in week 2, it says something, it refers to something about in the middle of that week in 2. Well, with this chiastic structure, the pair of week 2 would be week 9. That would be us. So that's why we look at the middle part there, and we would say, okay, somewhere around the middle, we should expect this to happen. And it's not an exact. I mean, 2025 is the exact like date. That's the middle of this week, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those events are going to happen on exactly 2025. It's just somewhere around the middle. Like in the second week, it talks about the flood, and it talks about Noah, and his birth was 6 years off from the exact middle point, but it's still generally the middle. So that's why we can't be too exact when it comes to like exact dates. It's more generally around that time. So generally somewhere around the time of the middle of the 9th week, we should see the tribulation. We should see the return of the Messiah. We should see the judgment of the angels, all of that stuff. And so we're right there. We're a few years, according, if this is right, we're a few years away from that. And then you have the rest of the weeks in the middle. They don't give any kind of like time signature for what part of the week to look at. They're just general. In this week, this and this happens. But to me, the most fascinating part of that prophecy is seeing that, again, that date, 2025, 2026, that comes up again, even in this other prophetic time count that Enoch writes about. And it points again to really the time period that we're living in now. So I would expect something significant in the next 2-3 years, we should start seeing some more prophecies being fulfilled. We're already seeing that. I mean, we've been seeing that since Israel became a nation again. So in a way, that's nothing new, but that should increase, but also miracles and things like that. We should see an increase in that too. Also, unfortunately, a big increase in apostasy, because that was another big marker for the end of the last jubilee of an age. Is there's massive apostasy. We clearly saw that at the end of the age of Torah with the Pharisees and everything. I mean, they killed Jesus, so that's obviously there's an apostasy happening there. But also at the end of the age of creation with the Tower of Babel, that's an apostasy. So, and then when you look at the world today, we live in a world here in 2024, 2025, in our time today, we live in a time that I think sometimes we take for granted how weird it is, how weird it is that the world works the way it does. The world has never worked like this before with all this technology and everything that we have now. We take it for granted because we're born into it. But think about it. It really was not that long ago that we were in horse and buggies. And now we're shooting rockets, into space, and we have orbiting satellites, and everybody's connected through the internet, and it's just a completely unprecedented time. And when you think about it, there's no reason that it had to be our time where that could have happened. The Greeks could have done that. They had the same math. They had the same materials, raw materials. They had the same intelligence. They could have created an automobile. They could have had an industrial revolution. There's no reason why they couldn't have had that. But I think something was restraining that. And I think that restrainer, I think the veil is kind of thinning now, and it's allowing a lot more of these things to happen. Another thing from the book of Enoch, we read that when the 200 watchers fell, they essentially gave a type of technology to mankind that they didn't have, and it was through war and things, cutting of roots, astrology, but they didn't have access to that before, and they gave them that. So that makes me wonder if the veil is thinning, if the restrainer is loosening, however we want to define that. Is it easier for fallen angels to provide mankind with, maybe not like swords and cutting of roots like it was before, but now, microchips and technology and the internet. And I'm not, oh, my daughter came in to say hi. Hey, okay, I'm doing an interview, sweetheart. I love you. Go see mama. Sorry about that. It's totally fine if you wanted to leave that in there.
It's totally
she does
fine.
that she does that in a lot of my videos. But,
it's way too
anyway,
cute.
yeah, she's adorable. She's my whole heart. But so just thinking about, like, is it possible that we've now in this time where it absolutely could have been possible to do this before, but now in this time, because we're getting so late into our church age, into our age of grace, is that veil thinning? Is that restrainer loosening? And does that allow evil agents to bestow upon us technology that we might not have been able to create on our own when the veil was more in full effect? And I think that's very likely, because how else do we explain just how weird and different and how much it changes year by year? I mean, I was born in the 80s, and even that was pretty technological compared to the rest of the world. But it's a totally different world today than when it was. I didn't have the internet when I grew up. We didn't have tablets. Cell phones weren't a thing. Cordless phones were just starting to become a thing, but everybody still had a landline. And today, I didn't have a computer. I had a typewriter. But today, it's after 40 short years later, it's a totally different world, and it's getting so advanced I can't even keep up with it. Like my kids are able to. My 5-year-old is able to, like, do stuff on her tablet, and it's like, how did you even learn how to do that? Like, how did you learn how to find that app? And we're careful with it. There's all sorts of protections and stuff, and she just has like kids teaching apps and stuff. But she's able to log in. She's able to put her passcode in. Like, it's like I never would have been able to figure that out when I was 5 years old in 1989. So it's just crazy to think about. So I think that it's very telling why this year 2025, 2026, why this time period that we're living in keeps coming up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it's incredibly prophetic, and I think we're about to see a lot of crazy stuff, both good and bad, in our near future.
No, I totally agree. And I think it's interesting that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, a year before Israel became a nation, which, that Israel becoming a nation is just a key to Bible prophecy. And also back to those weeks, when you were talking about like week 2, that coincides with week 9, which we are in week 9. And again, that in week 2, because you talk about each thing in your books, of the weeks and what happened, and it's like prophetically. I mean, when you look at week 7 and week 8, you're just gonna have to get the books to see what happened. But it's like, oh my goodness, yes, that happened in history. So, but it was written before that. And so, but week 2, which you said coincides with week 9, is Noah's flood, the events leading to Noah's flood, and the great wickedness caused by fallen angels mating with human women. But Jesus said, just like in the days of Noah. So
That's right.
right.
Really
So
good point.
yeah, so it's like really, really crazy because it's coinciding with week 9, and like you said, the fallen angels and technology, which of course, the whole Roswell thing started. We started seeing,
Yeah.
more evidence of the fallen angels. With the
Yes.
what they call
And
UFOs.
I've wondered that too, talking about the technology. Is it possible I know this is a little off of left field, but I've written about this as well. These spaceship crashes, is that just fallen angels giving us technology? Because when you look at that, um, it was about that time that we started seeing a lot of advancements in technology, far surpassing anything that came before. And so I wonder, are these crashes deliberate? Is this actually fallen angel technology, and they're basically just throwing them down to earth to give us this stuff so we'll use it really to our own destruction? And I think that's very likely.
Okay, we probably could talk forever on this. Yeah, I mean, like, I just like feel like, World War II and then Hitler. I mean, I think that he was in contact with these fallen angels.
Yes.
And I actually believe that the Nazi scientists had technology from the fallen angels because it was just, and then
Yep.
when they came over to, the United States, what is that, Operation
Paperclip.
Paperclip, yep.
Yep.
So it's like, wait a minute, how did you even know how to do that kind of stuff? And it was very, very evil, which, you would expect from the fallen angels. So it's like, okay, yeah, no, like you said, it just started really advancing. All of this technology kept on advancing and advancing. So it really shows the time that we're living in, but then it shows that Jesus is coming back soon.
Amen. I totally agree, and that's basically the crux of the whole 2 volume set, is showing that even if we're wrong about the calendar, even if we're wrong about these dates, because I don't set a date in the book. I don't actually at the last part of the book. I tell people, if I were a betting man, I would say 2025 is going to come and go and nothing's going to happen, because every time somebody tries to predict something, it doesn't happen. So I don't predict anything in the Bible or in the book from the Bible. I don't predict any specific date. And I tell people, don't sell your house, don't max out your credit cards, don't make any big life changes. But the main thing is, even though we don't know the day or the hour, we don't even know the year. We can kind of gauge the season, I think, and that's a broad general term. It doesn't mean any particular amount of time, but we can just kind of gauge the season that we're in. And so the main message of the book is that even though we don't know exactly when, Jesus is coming back soon, very soon. Just look at the season that we're in and what's happening. We can't pinpoint an exact day, but Jesus is coming soon. So now is the time, if you haven't already, to get right with Christ. Now is the time to accept Jesus as your Savior if you haven't already. Now is the time to start praying. If you're saved and you just don't pray, and you just, Christianity isn't a part of your life, but you're technically saved because you believe in Jesus, well, now's the time to really start living for Jesus and start dedicating your life to him. Just going to heaven, that's great, but that's not enough. The Bible teaches that there are going to be people who go to heaven and they have no rewards, they have no status. You have powerful leaders who are rich in this world who, yeah, they may be saved, they may have gotten saved, but they're not living for Christ, they're living for themselves. Well, Jesus said that basically the greatest on earth, they're going to be the least in heaven. Somebody who's living a life just on their own, without Christ, even if they technically believe in Jesus and they've accepted that gift of salvation, well, when they get to heaven, they're not going to have any rewards, and they're going to be least in the kingdom of heaven. So, and we all need to think like that too. Like, am I living for Christ, or am I living for myself? Every decision we make, we should be thinking that. And especially because given in light of all these prophecies, not only in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but just in the Bible as well. And we take that for Holy Scripture. I don't take the Dead Sea Scrolls as the inspired word of God for our time or anything. And I get into all that in the book. It's really great history, accurate prophecy. But if people are turned off to the idea of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we'll just look at your Bible. That is the holy word of God, and that tells us the time that we're living in, that the time is getting short. So yeah, now is the time to be dedicated to Christ more than any other time, because again, Jesus is coming soon.
Absolutely. And Jesus said that we should not be ignorant of the times and the seasons.
That's right.
Josh, thank you so much. Can you tell people where they can get the two-book series, two books, and your website?
Absolutely. So the 2-volume set, it's called Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the absolute best place to get it is prophecywatchers.com. Make sure you get both books, because one won't make sense without the other. So prophecywatchers.com, the best place to get it. Now, I will say, if somebody wants an audiobook, or if they want the Kindle version, that is only available on Amazon, so they'd be able to find that there. And then my personal website is dailyrenegade.com, which is a place where I house all of my videos, most of which I can't put on YouTube because of censorship issues. We've had videos deleted. We've had entire channels deleted. So I created Daily Renegade as a place, and I talk a lot about Dead Sea Scrolls and prophecy. I mainly focus on prophecy, and I've got a ton of videos about it. Magnetic pole shifts, and just all sorts of things. So if you're into prophecy, you'll love Daily Renegade. It is a membership platform, because it's not. I didn't want to run it like a 501c3, because I don't want the government telling me what I can and can't say. That's the whole point of Daily Renegade, where you can go on there, you can comment on videos. There's a community tab that works a lot like Facebook. You can say whatever you want, and we can all fellowship with each other, as long as you're not being rude or being a troll. But it's a great place to fellowship. And all of my complete videos, I usually only put the first half of my videos on YouTube and then point people to Daily Renegade. But they're all available in full at Daily Renegade, with even my show notes, with the notes that I used to create all these videos. So it's $10 a month or $100 a year. If people can do it, I suggest $100 a year, because technically you get 2 months for free if you do it that way. Whereas if you go month to month, you're paying $120 a year. But that helps continue the website. That helps continue what we've been able to build, a censorship-free place where we can talk about Israel and prophecy and not have to worry about YouTube taking it down. And it also helps continue in our efforts to build a TV app and a phone app for Daily Renegade. So that's my website. That's a brief rundown of what Daily Renegade is all about. And then, yeah, definitely check out prophecywatchers.com, not only for my books, but for all the other amazing materials that they have there.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. 5
major end-time events are coming in 2025. Craig Bong reveals them in this video, so you won't be caught by surprise. Click to watch now.